Hi, so this is third time lucky, so fingers crossed this is the one that's going to work for us today. So welcome to our Instagram live. This live was supposed to take place during Mental Health Awareness Week, but unfortunately, due to sickness in my house, it had to be postponed. Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week aims to get people talking about mental health problems before, during and after pregnancy, to help people access information, care and support they need. So by way of introduction, my name is Dr. Maeve Hilliard and I'm your host for today. I'm a researcher with a special interest in physical activity in pregnancy, and I'm really lucky and fortunate to work with the Active Pregnancy Foundation as one of their Active Pregnancy Foundation reps. I'm also mum to 3 young boys who are 1, 4 and 6, so it's very much a lived experience for me as well. So as I've mentioned, this live was planned for Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, so I'm really excited today that we have Dr. Carla Meijen joining us to discuss how you can use sports psychology to help approach your maternity journey as a positive challenge. So Carla applies the principles of sport and endurance psychology to approach the maternity journey. Now we've had some problems with and get her added now whilst things are hopefully working. Yes!
Yay!
Third time lucky, we've got it. Brilliant. I didn't want to give too much of an introduction because I could see that you had requested to join and I wanted to make sure we got you in whilst we could. So I would love you to give us an introduction to who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad we made it. I'm Carla Meijen, and I'm a accredited sport and exercise psychologist, and I'm also a associate professor in applied sports psychology at St Mary's University here in London. And I gave birth to a girl a couple of years ago, and well, she's 3 now. And a lot of our work has to do with kind of applying sports psychology to different settings. And one of my areas of interest in particular is like endurance performance. So both in my research and kind of in my applied work, like how do you prepare for a marathon and those types of things. And I remember that during my maternity journey, you know, like the NCT classes and all of that, there's often like this comparison that's being made to a marathon, you know, like giving birth is a marathon, you need a lot of like, you know, pushing through pain and discomfort, motivation, you know, it can be quite a lengthy affair. You know, like there's a lot of thoughts that pop in your mind during that time frame. And, you know, how do you kind of stay motivated throughout, or, you know, things that are very typical, and pace yourself is also a very key factor. And I guess unconsciously or quite unaware, some of these seeds were planted for this idea of the book. And then I guess my own labor was, I think, over 50 hours from start to finish. So from when, you know, the water broke till my little girl came out. And I literally had to draw on every bit of like sports psychology experience that I gathered over the years. So what I teach my students, what I, you know, teach the athletes I work with, all these different psychological strategies came out very, very useful. And when I kind of lost the kind of awareness of using them, I immediately noticed the effect. And then I guess the other thing that really inspired me to write this book was that when I had conversations with other mums, you know, straight after giving birth, a lot of them shared how they had this really good intentions to use strategies that they learned during the kind of birthing classes, but they've not really had a good opportunity to practice them, and in the heat of the moment, they really forgot to use them. So there was this just really big gap, if you like, between good intentions and actually putting that into action. And I guess, you know, that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. And I did some research, and there was actually nothing out there. And considering when I spoke to Marlisa that, you know, about 25% of people have a really strong identity linked to exercise and sport, you know, why don't we do something about this? Why can't we draw on our experiences in sport to really empower ourselves to, you know, we've learned to push through pain and discomfort. We've had like these long training sessions that may be a little bit boring, you know, had to manage like conversations with coaches. Like, you know, we have a lot more in our toolbox than we probably realize. So I guess that's what I wanted to do, is to like, rather than you starting from scratch during maternity journey, actually build on stuff that you've already got. So what are those lessons that we can learn from sports psychology to really feel empowered, if you like, during maternity journey, and see it more as a positive challenge and not so much as kind of this negative threat. So I suppose that's a bit of a quick introduction to what I've been up to.
Brilliant. So by way of background, I think on this live that has been successful, I haven't really even mentioned your book. So Carla has a book which is coming out in June, and we're really lucky today that she's actually going to give us a bit of a sneak peek into the contents of this book. So if you are perhaps thinking about having a baby, you're pregnant, or even if you've had a birth recently and your delivery didn't go as planned, Carla has really helpful strategies within this book which would be really useful to you. I wish that whenever I had my kids that this book was around, because it just seems to make sense, doesn't it? You have these strategies that you've used in other contexts. Why can't we apply them to birth and pregnancy and labour, and have this whole toolkit that we've got? We know that it's there, but just how to apply it. So I'm really excited to delve into your book today. So do you want to start at the beginning? Give us a little bit about what tools we have in our toolkit maybe, and how we can use them.
Yeah, I think before we kind of dive into the toolkit, what's really important to realize is that we want to know what the purpose is of using it. So when it comes to, giving birth, there's a lot of different psychological demands out there. So, and for some, that is kind of, maybe being a bit afraid of pain and discomfort, which is absolutely fine. Others, they feel maybe unsure, some anxiety. You may feel the need to control everything, even uncontrollable. So maybe it's about learning to let go and learning what's within and outside of your control. Maybe it's about motivation or managing negative thoughts, or feeling that confidence, especially if it's your first. How do you feel that kind of believe in your skills that you can do this? So that kind of notion of self-belief and self-efficacy. So it's really important to kind of think about, okay, where are my strengths and where are maybe some of the things I want to develop, and which kind of strategies can really help me with that. So I think that's kind of as a starting point, rather than just thinking, oh, self-talk is the magical tool that will apply to everything across the board. It's more about, okay, there are different strategies out there and they can be used in different kind of stages of labor even. Pacing is definitely important at the start. Not trying to do that clock watching, going quicker and trying to control the uncontrollables. So I think that's the kind of first thing that's really important to consider, is the kind of, the why you're using it. And also there are some probably strategies that you might go to all the time because they work for you, you're confident in their use. But actually there are some other strategies that are more of those unique tools that you do require in your toolkit. But they're only come out once or twice, but they prove invaluable. And I guess the final thing before we delve into the strategies that's really important is you need to practice those. So kind of that example of a toolbox, you've got a flat tire in your car, and there's a jack still in the packaging. You've never used it. You don't feel that comfortable or confident of how you're actually using it. So I think that's the other thing when we think about these kind of strategies. So it's practice. Know the why, and be flexible. Don't just use one, but kind of have a good look in your toolbox.
If someone is listening to our live and thinking, oh, I haven't done sport in a long time, or I maybe have never really participated in sport, would this still be relevant to them? Do they have other strategies or other situations that they could kind of make it applicable for them?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about sport, often the link or comparison is being drawn to performance psychology, so kind of the wider pressure, like moments where you feel you need to perform under pressure. So you've got maybe a presentation at work that you had to give and you felt nervous about that. Like, how did you manage those nerves? You can reflect on that. Maybe you're in emergency services, so kind of that pressure of going to an incident is also something that you could reflect on. The performing arts, like acting, singing, maybe you have to do a concert under pressure. So there's the kind of these related fields that you can also kind of reflect on. What have you gained from that, and what are some of those strategies? So rather than, I guess, when we think about sports psychology, it's about going from what you've already got and kind of building on that, rather than going from something that's wrong and trying to fix it. I think that's a nice way of perhaps describing that. So you're building on what you've already got.
It's really nice to know that there's something for everyone in your book, and that everyone has, even if they don't realize, been in situations where they have used these skills before.
Hopefully, yes. So yeah, maybe let's dive into one. Shall we? So maybe start with goal setting.
So,
That's
yeah.
usually kind of like the start of the maternity journey, isn't it? I don't know if you recall your
Well, I
experience.
get your, well, over here in Northern Ireland, we get our handheld green notes, and there's a yellow page inside, and it says birth plan. And you sit there and think, okay, so this is me obviously setting my goals and trying to plan what I would like to happen. And for me, I've had 3 very different labours, and I would say none of them went to plan. So I think you have some good strategies for overcoming those kind of
Yeah,
challenges.
exactly. Yeah, I actually titled that chapter "Birth Plan Overboard." So often when I work with endurance athletes, a lot of times what I tend to do is they have this kind of do or die goal. So they have this kind of often a performance or outcome related goal that's either time based or a particular finishing position. And that can give you a lot of motivation to, adapt your training, stick to your training plan. But actually, on the day, that's not going to do that much for you. In fact, it can give you a lot of pressure because if you see that you're kind of going quite a bit away from that kind of do or die goal, you might even panic or you might give up. Whereas actually having a little bit of goal flexibility is one strategy to consider. So having a plan A, a plan B, or a C, or often how we kind of label that is like your dream goal, your happy goal, or your acceptable goal, which maybe is a bit less appropriate when it comes to labor. So maybe think about it more as like an A, B, and C goal. So, like the A goal is exactly what's in your birth plan. Everything goes well on the day and it's going quite all right, quite happy. So when you think about a marathon, perfect sleep in the week leading up, no colds whatsoever, and you're just feeling strong. But sometimes the conditions on the day are less than perfect, still okay, and you might go for a happy goal. And actually what you find throughout the event is things actually feel a little bit better than you thought. So you might move back up to that kind of plan A. And sometimes, things just, it's not your day. And I think what sometimes happens, and this is also something that I've heard in conversations with other mums, is that when they abandon the goal, that plan A and that plan B, and they have to revert to the plan C, like the emergency C-section, they feel devastated. And I think having that goal flexibility might kind of ease some of that pressure. So yes, there might be an emergency C-section, and you can plan for that when we think about imagery as a tool, like what might that look like? So actually you don't feel so kind of thrown in the moment, is something to consider. So I guess that's one kind of thing about goal setting, having that goal flexibility and not just focusing on those performance and kind of outcome goals, but really think about your process goals. And when it comes to giving birth, there's a whole bunch of process goals that you can consider, like how are you going to do your breathing? How will you maybe communicate with others around you? What is maybe the type of things that you say to yourself to keep you motivated? Your hydration, there's quite a few things there that you can consider in terms of process goals rather than this is my perfect birth and this is how I want to do it. And if then things are out of your control, it's going to be really tough to accept that.
Definitely. And I can say now and on reflection that I was definitely too outcome focused, and that putting in those process goals means that even if you don't achieve the end goal quite how you want to, you've achieved those process goals along the way, haven't you? And maybe that changes your feelings of how things have gone overall as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of gives you some of that ownership back, doesn't it? So it's when you think about a challenge state, there's 3 key ingredients to that. So one of that is that notion of perceived control. The other one is self-efficacy. So you can also set goals like how can you give yourself a kind of self-confidence and self-belief. And it's also that kind of approach motivation. So rather than trying to stick your head in the sand, it's kind of, hit that situation head on, if you like. So maybe you're afraid of a conversation with a midwife, you don't want to maybe question a consultant, but that would be in your best interest to do so. So it's about kind of having that preparation, having those process goals of how you might maybe tackle some of those situations, can be quite empowering for a lot of women. So, there's a whole bunch of other things in the goal setting chapter, such as kind of this idea of if-then planning. So kind of thinking about what some situations might be that you come across. So this is kind of approach orientation, isn't it? And already start to think about what you can do to tackle those. So have, like let's say if you feel that you're losing control, how can you engage in your breathing to regain some of that control? So, if you feel that it's all becoming a little bit too much, I will then tune into my breathing, have a very specific breathing strategy that I've practiced, and I know that I can do, to kind of really tune into my body and kind of ignore everything that's going on around me.
And would you work with your birth partner or the midwife and discuss what your planning are, so that you can kind of have an idea and feel that you've got support to then carry them out through your labour?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Whoever your birth partner is, that they know that, well, obviously you've got your birth plan that's in your maternity notes, but also actually how are you what you're going to do. So your goals for the birth, and maybe the different goals for the different stages of labor. So in the first, starting stage, if I start to do clock watching, then I will ask the midwife to take the clock away, and I will tune into one contraction at a time. So then you have a really specific, if I start to worry about that, then I will do this. Or if I start to comparing my experiences to my friends, what I will do is I will actually tell myself, it's my birth, it's my baby, I've run this baby inside, and I'm the one who's going to push it out, not them. So using some like self-talk.
Fantastic. I think the if-then planning is really helpful, isn't it? To just prepare you, get yourself into that environment and think of what can happen. I know for my first labour, whenever we were in the birth preparation classes, whenever they talked about an epidural or C-sections, I didn't pay attention because that wasn't me, and I wasn't going down that route, and I didn't need to know about any of that because that wasn't going to happen. And obviously I wasn't in control, and things did go that way, and I didn't have the mental preparation done, and I think it would have really been helpful if I had, to prepare myself in advance for those situations.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's so recognizable. I remember that, like, just the word C-section, I was like, yeah, no. But it was really good. We actually acted it out during one of our birth preparation classes, what that would look like. So I think that was so invaluable, and that kind of helped my letting go of a plan B and C, if I needed to. Obviously my birth wasn't like planned either. So it really helped me to let go. And I think what was invaluable for me was like tuning into my emotions, letting my emotions play a role, like let them surface rather than pushing them away, to then move from that plan A to plan B to plan C back to plan A.
That's brilliant. I just think as long as you have those plans in place, then you're still on plan, even if your plan is slightly further down the list of plans than you thought. You touched then on the self-talk strategy. Can you give us a little bit more information about how you could use that during labour?
Yeah, so when we think about self-talk, there are a couple of different things there. So when we think about this in a sports psychology setting, you've got like typically what we call instructional and motivational self-talk, and it's a plan that you can put in place before. So you think about, okay, well, maybe I need a confidence booster, so I'm going to draw on something called motivational self-talk to get myself through some of those difficult moments of a marathon, for example. Or perhaps you need more kind of a reminder of your strategy. So perhaps you notice that, around mile 20 of a marathon, your left foot starts to stray away a little bit. So actually you need that instructional self-talk to remind yourself to tune into your technique. And that's like a very popular approach in sports psychology. You have that instructional, motivational self-talk, and it's often a preset plan that you practice in your training, you tune into it, and you kind of know that on race day, these are, the reminders that I can give myself to tune into these different types of self-talk. You also have something that's called a bit more like a reflexive approach. So we have a ton of thoughts. I think, thousands and thousands, like the actual number varies, but we constantly have that chatter with ourselves. And we don't always even tune into it, but it can be quite detrimental, some of these thoughts. So you can also learn to kind of listen to these thoughts and start to recognize which ones are helpful or sometimes even irrational thoughts. Then you learn to kind of dispute some of those beliefs that underpin some of those, especially a little bit more irrational thoughts. So, one of the things that you often hear when it comes to birth is like, oh, I'm only, dilated 2 or 3 centimeters. This is the end of the world. That is already not particularly helpful. But then that kind of addition, this is the end of the world, makes it really unhelpful. That belief is, probably going to inform some decisions that you make. Maybe, you feel really under pressure, start to like lash out to your birth partner, maybe feel rushed. So it's about, okay, well, what's the evidence that, 2 or 3 centimeters is the end of the world. Well, my baby just decides that they take their time a little bit longer, and that's fine. So yes, it's good doing your research on kind of what the stages look like, what the timing is like, but also obviously make those adjustments for your own kind of individual circumstances. So I think what's really helpful is to think about a couple of self-talk statements that are really powerful for you. So things that maybe when you, if you're able to do exercise during maternity, your pregnancy, maybe you're doing some yoga classes, or you're able to do some running, and maybe you feel a little bit pain and discomfort, and maybe there's a pose in a yoga class that's a bit challenging. Think about what self-talk gets you through that pain. It's a really nice kind of practice thing that you can do during your pregnancy to then really feel empowered that this is something that works for you. And it might be that it's an instructional strategy, so that actually, okay, I'm really going to focus on my positioning here. Really going to focus on my breathing strategy. Or perhaps it's more motivational, like, come on, you can do this. Like last week you managed a couple of seconds. Now actually, I know I can do this. I'm going to manage for a little bit longer. And those types of things, and then those preset plans that you can practice to really give you that confidence going into your, your childbirth, your labor, and share those with your birth partner. Share them with your midwife if you can. Put them in your birth plan, so they can remind you of that, rather than using generic self-talk statements, because at the end of the day, you're not going to feel relatable to those, and they're not going to work for you as well as the ones that are practiced and rehearsed.
That's great advice, because I think that probably everyone watching has been in a yoga class or some kind of activity where they felt that kind of, oh, I can't keep going. And being able to put that into the scenario of being in labour and how you talk to yourself during that time is brilliant. So then the other strategy you had briefly mentioned there was imagery. And I know that you said that midwife Pip had a lovely imagery example that she discusses in your book. Could you give us that example and then discuss?
Yeah. Let me go find. I think I wrote it down. I kind of know it. I did a podcast with her last week, so she did talk about it. So when we think about imagery, just to kind of give you a brief background, it's kind of creating or recreating an image in your mind using all your different senses. So often people think about it as visualization, but you actually use, touch is a big one. Smell, the hospital smell if you're giving birth in a hospital, or when you're giving birth at home, like the comfortable kind of smell of home. What you hear, what you see, all those different senses are kind of important to make imagery as kind of vivid and powerful as possible. You also make sure you have control over it. So, we use imagery all the time, but sometimes it takes control over us rather than we having control over it, and know why you're using it. So having that self-awareness. So what she did is she used it a lot for her breathing technique. So what she did for this kind of upward breath, she visualized a giant yellow balloon in her abdomen and her pelvic area, which was deflated at the start. And then when a contraction started, she would breathe kind of upwards, and she would imagine this yellow balloon kind of filling up with air, and it would float up to fill her entire abdomen. So what that really did is it helped her to tune into her breathing strategy and to kind of move away from maybe some of that pain and discomfort and really tune into that process. That's a lovely example of kind of technique. So using imagery to remind you of technique. You can also use it to dissociate yourself a little bit from the pain. So maybe imagine yourself in a happy place, a nice holiday destination or a happy song. The only thing with that's important is don't get stuck in that for the whole duration, because obviously sometimes pain is a sign that you need to communicate with the health professionals in the room. That something needs to happen. So don't just use dissociative imagery throughout. It can give you a bit of relief, but obviously you need to make sure you tune into your body as well.
I love that. I think it's just a great image to be able to really pull you back and focus on your breathing and imagining this big yellow balloon in your abdomen.
Or whatever colour resonates with you.
Your favourite colour is, or maybe a colour that you don't mind because you don't want to then think about it in the future. But I think it's great to have that, because I know that your breathing can be something which, whenever you start feeling fear or panicked, can start to suffer and start to go off. I know for me that I was imagining just holding my baby at the end, and that helped me get through pain and difficult situations as well. Just imagining the end goal was what worked for me during that time as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very common one. Or when you don't know the gender, it's that kind of, imagining, looking forward to the kind of gender reveal. At the end of it, that motivation, when you're really feeling like you're completely running out of steam, or gas, like how do you, draw an imagery to maybe imagine that lovely meal that you'll treat yourself to
or the
afterwards.
toast and jam that never has tasted so good that you get when you're in hospital.
Yeah, totally. It took me a while to get that one, but yeah. That's something I normally look forward to, but it was delicious.
Best toast I've ever had. I'm really aware of time today, and I really want to make sure we have enough time to discuss the postpartum chapter in enough detail. So before we move on, would you like to just give us a brief then overview of kind of the other chapters that are in the middle of the book, and any other key points that you'd like to kind of summarize there for us?
Yeah, I think we talked about breathing already a little bit. So it's that kind of, again, really practice this. So obviously diaphragmatic breathing is something you carry with you wherever you go. But we don't always realize that breathing is actually a purposeful strategy that we can draw on. And that's one that's, I guess, is useful for pretty much everyone to have in our toolbox. Just realize that when you do diaphragmatic breathing, when you're pregnant, it is a little bit different from when you're, not pregnant. So just realize and tune into that, and that will be really helpful to kind of give you that confidence. And kind of, I also talked a little bit about mindfulness, like what are some of the things that you can do there to kind of move away from this kind of we're judgmental. So moving away from that kind of sense of and being not non-judgmental and in the moment is a really key thing there. Which aligns to focus. I talk about that a little bit in the book, and different strategies as to how you can become aware of being in, when you're moving away from being in the task kind of circle, if you like. So ideally we want to be in the zone and really focusing on the task, but sometimes, especially comparisons to how it is but how it should be, or comparison to others, can be quite detrimental. So kind of, I talk about some things that you can do to tune into the task focus again. And then the other thing, kind of final things, like social support system is really important. So yes, there will be a lot of support around you. A lot of that will be informational support. When you go to the midwives, there'll be a lot of information, but not all of that might resonate with you. So really start to work on who will be in your support network, who you can draw to, like in the moment. So for example, there are some people that are going to be available to just send some short text messages to when you're in labor, who will understand. So do some reflection, do some discussions with people who will be kind of, not just receive support, but how do you tune that received support into perceived support is a really key factor. And have those difficult discussions well before you're going into labor. I think is another bit of advice that I talk about in the book. And support might come from a very surprising background, so it might be someone you hadn't thought about, but actually is really helpful.
Brilliant. I think support is so important, isn't it? And I think we also touched on when we were talking before about how sometimes family members or other friends can be maybe overly supportive, and at that point messages and things aren't helpful, and how you can then tune them out as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I had a really fantastic example in the book where Finley, a personal trainer, her partner knew her very well, and knew that she could really relate to the high intensity interval training sessions she did. So when she felt like she didn't know where to get her energy from anymore, he reminded her of how strong she is and that she's done this in the past, which I thought was fantastic. And Emma, who's a marathon runner, what I think is really important is for your birth partner who's going to be there in the moment when you're so vulnerable, or, not everyone is, but like some might feel quite vulnerable, quite naked, exposed is perhaps a better word to use there, that they've seen you in moments when you felt in pain and discomfort, and they know how you're going to respond in those situations. So she had run a marathon with her husband, and he knew how she would respond in situations where she'd feel anxious and where she'd felt in pain. So she could completely trust him during the birth. And I think that's quite a helpful consideration is make sure they know how you respond in situations where it's difficult, and I think for you also to know how they respond can be quite helpful.
I think that's great advice, because it is such a alien and unknown experience for both the birth partner and the person in labour. And I think that if you're both on the same page and you've discussed these things and prepared in advance, that it can just make such a difference to how the event goes on the day, can't it?
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the chapters that I'm most excited about reading in the book is your postpartum chapter. And I know that a lot of our followers will perhaps have already had babies, but perhaps their labour didn't necessarily go according to plan A, or maybe even not plan B. And a lot of women then are left feeling maybe perhaps they failed, they haven't achieved what they wanted. And there can be a lot of big emotions around this. So what do you then recommend or suggest, or what can women do if their birth hasn't actually gone the way that they hoped it would?
Yeah, I think it's such an important thing, isn't it? Kind of often we tend to not tune into this kind of postpartum period as much as we could do. I mean, obviously, you've given birth, suddenly you're a mother, but that identity, needs time to develop. Like, when you didn't learn about your sports, you didn't learn to be a good, basketball player, football player, runner, whatever, overnight. And it's the same with becoming a mother. It takes time. You need time to practice to do that, or like give yourself time to establish this new identity. And I think that's one thing that's sometimes that big change, and maybe having really high expectations beforehand about your birth. You only had a plan A, you didn't accommodate for plan B and C, is what caused a lot of kind of perhaps dissatisfaction, or a lot of really intense emotions to get, and then at the same time you're trying to get used to this new situation. So I think it's a combination of those two things that's really important. And I think what's also really important at the outset is that, obviously we've got the baby blues at the start, like those first 2 weeks, but actually if you feel you've got anything that's happening over an extended period of time, you feel you can't get out of bed, that, like the emotions are too overwhelming, too intense, seek out help. Don't do it by yourself. I think, before I go into what the types of things are that you can do, at the same time, it's important to seek out help. It's normal to, there's quite probably high percentage, I think, of women who struggle with the kind of, beyond the blues, so kind of postpartum depression, or kind of that trauma that they might have experienced during their labour. And when we think about trauma, that's anything that can be anything that kind of keeps you awake for a long time. So, make sure that you then, what you can do in the UK is you can organise a debrief when you're ready. With a hospital, it might not be with the same person who was there during your birth, or it might be with the midwife if you had a home birth. And sometimes can be quite refreshing looking at those notes. But what's really important is that you do this when you feel quite calm, so you can kind of listen and take someone with you if you can, who can help you make notes. And another thing that you can do, and this is something that the English Institute of Sport has developed around kind of, I guess, the Tokyo Olympic cycle, which they call kind of the decompression of emotion. So what they say is the kind of 4 different stages. So Dr. Daniel Adams, who's the kind of head of performance psychology there, kind of talked me through this process of what they've done. So, obviously in Olympic Games, it's a lot of things, and, also a lot of times it might not be as you'd expected. So a lot of big emotions are occurring there. And what's really important is to kind of have that kind of what they call a hot debrief straight after. So this might be, the text messages that you send to people straight after. It might be a voice note on your phone. It might be conversations you have with your partner, or some pictures that remind you of that. So kind of having that hot debrief, and don't kind of put yourself under pressure of trying to normalize the experience straight away or making sense of it. So give yourself some time to kind of just offload some of those emotions. And then what they have is kind of a second stage, is that time zero. So kind of trying to really enjoy or tune in is maybe better, kind of the time with your baby. Don't feel the pressure that you immediately need to know everything, kind of, take it one day at a time. And then when you're ready, and when this is really individual, you might want to start to kind of work around processing the emotion. And what they've done is they kind of set out 6 steps to do this. So the first step is what they call contracting. So what do you want to kind of get out of the process of emotional decompression? Is it perhaps to make sense of what happened during the birth, so you don't feel so bad about, what you see often is that people had to have an emergency C-section and they didn't get the water birth at home that they wished for, and that can cause a lot of grief. So it's, what are you trying to get out of that process? Is that kind of first stage of contracting. And the second thing, and this is actually quite helpful for, I guess, a lot of us to do, is to pull together a timeline of meaningful moments. So what happened? So capture those kind of meaningful moments of the event, and who were there, how did you feel, what were the emotions, and what did you do? So that kind of helps you take a step back as such. And then you're starting to tune into those thoughts, feelings, and emotions from the timeline. Maybe pick one event that was really critical to you, and can you label the emotion? So rather saying, this is frustration, it's like, it's about I feel frustrated rather than I am frustrated. So again, kind of having a little bit of distance there. And you want to acknowledge that people respond differently to those events. So it's really about your personal experience and realizing that emotions, they come and they go. It's a bit like the cloud, right? The clouds are never always stuck above your head. You could use an emotion wheel for that if that helps. And what was the impact of these kind of thoughts and emotions? And that moves on to that kind of 4th stage, which is recognizing the impact. Give yourself credit for going through the experience. And this is what we forget to do. So you've probably done a lot of really powerful things during that experience. Maybe you made some really brave decisions, or you had some really good communication with people around you. Maybe you managed to push through some pain and discomfort that you didn't give yourself any credit for, or maybe you were calm in moments of like lots of things happening around you. Some of the interviews I had, people said, yeah, suddenly like this emergency section had to happen. I just could not believe how calm I stayed.
Yeah.
Well, that's an amazing, that's such a
But we're so
reflection
on the negative, aren't we? And what we didn't do right or what didn't go right. Whereas you're so right that in those situations, so many things that you've achieved, staying calm whenever it's an emergency, when lots of people have rushed into the room or things have had to change quickly, and that you have been able to manage the situation well. And so if you can focus on those positives, it really does change your outlook, doesn't it, on how things went.
And there will always be one positive. You have to go look for it, actively, be proactive and look for it. So, and then it's kind of utilizing that meaning for looking ahead. So what do you see ahead in the horizon? How can you use that perspective that you gained from it? And what's your plan for looking after you? I think that's a really key thing as well. So obviously postpartum, it's all about the baby. It shouldn't all be about the baby. It should be about you, your body needs time to recover. So what's your plan for looking after you? And obviously this thing, sleep when the baby sleeps, is not that realistic in bit of advice. It works for some, but often it's, we all know that's not.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out.
So, really think about it and speak to others about, lessons that you can learn. And sometimes it's about normalizing things. And then it's kind of summarizing that sense making and, what you're going to do from there. And some of this you can do by yourself, but perhaps if, you are going more into kind of the emotions are affecting your day-to-day activities, your day-to-day life, your day-to-day thinking, is go to a health professional, and maybe you can pull together a timeline and take that to a health professional to feel prepared going into that conversation, feeling maybe a little bit more confident, because I know it can be, intimidating sometimes to speak to a mental health professional. So if that would give you a little bit of confidence going into some of those conversations, that could be really helpful.
I think it's just absolutely brilliant advice, Carla, because often we come away, we've got your baby, and there's just so many emotions that you just don't have time or space to process or even know where to begin. So I love the way you have it so clearly laid out with the different steps, and that it is something that women can actually do themselves, and then seek support if they need it. But it is just absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait until the 12th of June, is it?
Yes, 12th of June, yeah.
Your book is out, and it will cover all of today's discussions in a lot more detail. We have about 2 minutes left, so just as we're finishing, do you have kind of 3 key takeaway points that you would love women to take away on what they could do for their birth or postnatal journey?
Yes, I do. I got asked the same question at the podcast the other week, so they're prepared. I think the first one is pace yourself. It's not a competition. So in this accounts for the lead up as well as afterwards. You didn't train for your sport overnight, so it's the same. You don't train for your maternity journey overnight. Give yourself time to prepare and practice, and it's your journey at your pace. Then that's the notion of perceived control. We already started to talk about that a little bit. So really know what's in your control, what's outside of your control, and tuning into what you've got ownership and control over can give you a lot of confidence and help you move towards that kind of challenge approach and move away from that kind of stress approach. And then what's really important is that practice and reflection. So obviously you need to train everything, but to really grow and empower yourself, that notion of reflection is really important. So you've got that, you plan, you act, and then you reflect, and you keep doing that. And that's how you kind of really learn. So when you gave that example of, a yoga session, you practice some of that self-talk, you plan to use it, you try it, and then you say, well, actually, that didn't work for me. I felt a bit distant from that bit of self-talk, but actually, maybe I'll try, maybe there are too many words in that sentence, so maybe I just need to shorten it a little bit, because when I'm on the pain, I just need something that's quick and snappy. So practice, reflect. So really plan, do, reflect, and that's how you really gain ownership and hopefully confidence in some of those strategies and feel empowered. Okay, it might not be perfect, but if there's anything that can make that kind of journey a more positive one for you, then hopefully that's something that's been helpful.
That is brilliant, Carla. I just think, preparation is key, isn't it? As you say, we wouldn't go into a marathon without preparation, so why would we do the same for labour? That was just fascinating and so interesting, and obviously we've only touched the surface of what you've included in your book, so I would encourage everyone to go and buy it when it comes out on the 12th of June and read more in detail. So if you're listening today and you feel you need some help and support, as Carla has already mentioned, there are options available. Often the first port of call could be your GP, who could then refer you on to some appropriate support services. And as Carla also said, that some hospitals do offer a birth debrief, who isn't always with someone who was present at the birth, but they can take you through your notes, and that's often very, very helpful. So there are lots of options out there. So if you are feeling like you haven't processed your birth, or you are still feeling emotional about it, do seek support and help, because there are lots of options out there. But thank you so much, Carla. I love talking today. I'm so pleased that technology was on our side. We finally got together as well after different sickness bugs and things. So if anyone has any other questions, this will be saved onto the grid, and people can ask questions, and we'll do our very best to answer them for you. But that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Carla.
Thank you.